welcome back to the VMware to Microsoft podcast. I'm your host, Michael Richardson, CTO of Dynamic Consultants Group and author at richardsoncloud.com. I've got with me John Miller. He's going to share some more customer success stories with us, talking about migrating from VMware to Azure Stack HCI and Hyper-V. So, John, why don't you give a little introduction to yourself?
Sure. So my name is John Miller. I've been in the technology consulting space for 30 years. Worked for various Microsoft partners, including Microsoft itself. And I specialize in data center technologies and cloud technologies, specifically Azure and Azure Stack HCI.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So obviously a long history, lots of experience. So the goal of this podcast so far has just been to show people that, in the midst of this VMware crisis, that there is another option, right? There are other great options besides VMware, that Microsoft has a really mature and stable platforms. It's a great option for clients, a lot of value. So the next step here is I just want to showcase some folks that have really good client success stories. And so, John, I think you came with some example stories for us. Would you be willing to go ahead and dive into one of those? Tell us about what the situation was and where they're at now.
Sure. So I'll give you a little background. The company I'm at right now, we are getting a lot of inquiries because of the Broadcom purchase of VMware. I'd say overall, a lot of customers are inquiring about new technologies like Azure Stack HCI, since it is an edge solution, integrates with Azure. Another customer I was talking to recently, they were looking at Hyper-V, and I actually introduced Azure Stack HCI. So they're all very interested in learning more about it. So what I'm doing at customers right now is doing demos of my Microsoft build or Dell Azure Stack 23H2 environments to showcase the technologies and capabilities of Azure Stack HCI. I could give you some examples of customers. I started a customer, a global automotive customer. They're not looking to go to Hyper-V just because Azure Stack HCI has the latest tooling and integration with Azure. So they're migrating from VMware to Azure Stack HCI. They have approximately 350 different sites, 4 different data centers. This is a fairly new project going on. So they're new to the technology as well, even though they understand how the clusters, function just from a data center perspective.
Yeah. No, that's great to hear. I know there's a lot of people out there that are really getting into this at scale of doing these migrations. And so, for companies that are out there, you're not alone. This can be done at scale. Do you have anybody that's kind of on the tail end of one of those migrations that's like, yeah, we've done it. We're actually running in production on Hyper-V. We came from VMware, or on Azure Stack HCI. We came from VMware, and how's it going today?
We do. A lot of the customers are waiting for example, the stretch clustering to come out because there's some capabilities that everybody's interested in for at least the new version of Azure Stack HCI. I think the best scenario right now is customers, either some of them are net new to Azure, where they don't understand how they're going to leverage like Azure Virtual Desktop or Kubernetes clusters. But the other ones are very familiar, and they're starting to actually deploy a hybrid scenario where they may have AVD in Azure, but now they're starting to leverage it on site for remote contractors, or they're starting to deploy locally Kubernetes clusters instead of having them in Azure. So customers are starting to, broaden their understanding of the capabilities of the technology, especially as Microsoft releases new features and capabilities. It's opening the door to new fun tools, they call it, where they could start to play around, right?
Yeah. What do you think is the driver for some of these organizations that are already in Azure that are starting to move like AVD and AKS down to on-prem?
I had one conversation recently where they wanted, for governance and security reasons, their Azure Virtual Desktop environment locally, so that way the contractors remotely could VPN into their network. and then have access to that virtualized, desktop environment versus having it hosted in Azure. Usually compliance, governance, security related. Customers are looking to have things more local, especially with this technology giving you the capabilities.
Yeah, that's really interesting since Azure has such a high bar on the compliance and security side, but there are still a lot of companies and organizations out there that just really want the control of that's where my data, it's right there. I can touch it. Nobody, no other organization has the level of control and access that I do.
Exactly, and that's one of the drivers right now that I'm starting to hear in the
Yeah.
customers.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about somebody that's let's pick a customer. You don't have to share the name, but somebody that's like, okay, we're done. We've moved. We're on, Azure Stack HCI, and how's it going today? Like, what were the drivers for that migration, and why are we, how are they doing now?
Uh, the concerns about the licensing costs, even though Broadcom has released some new licensing models, example is allowing customers to move to AVS, Azure VMware Service, moving those licenses up to Azure, mainly pricing, licensing costs, even though there is a refresh on hardware at some of these customers because they don't have validated or integrated nodes having to
Hmm.
purchase new hardware, but a lot of them still just want to remain on site. Some of the customers are public utility type customers like police departments or state governments where they're just going to stay on site. They have very little Azure footprint and they're starting to move and they're really liking the experience. The IOPS and throughput of the storage is comparable to their the traditional SAN devices or NAS devices. And what I'm starting to see and understand is that a lot of the customers can actually get rid of their SANs because of the capabilities and growth of the storage spaces direct. It allows them to just move all the VMs off their SANs to Azure Stack HCI. So there's a lot of wins, but
Hmm.
it's mainly the costs around VMware and the refreshing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so cost and value is really a big driver there. I something I've been saying for a while is, it's not only cost because of course you have to have a great solution to host this too, but it's value, right? Like what are you getting for the money that you're spending on VMware? It's, if you're hosting VMs and that's your primary workload, you could do that on a number of different platforms successfully. And of course, Azure Stack HCI is a great one. If you're doing some type of virtual desktop hosting or container hosting, you can do that on a number of platforms. And Azure Stack HCI is a great one to do that. But what it comes down to is what are you spending all of this money on for VMware? Like if other solutions can do this just as well and the cost is now going through the roof, the value on these platforms like Azure Stack HCI is really, really high, and the licensing model makes it possibly free. So I think that's really interesting. That's one of the drivers I'm seeing as well is cost and value. Like what are we going to get for this? So you talked about, you know, local government type of entities, police departments, things like that are doing some of these migrations. Um, they have some of the, we're going to stay on-prem forever type of drivers. Is that one of the primary verticals you're seeing that folks are staying on-prem is like local government and things like that, or
it's fairly new. A lot of the inquiries are coming in, for the net new engagements where they're trying to understand where they can go.
hmm.
So of course, Hyper-V is kind of a legacy technology now. Azure Stack HCI is the upgraded version. I call it a Hyper-V with more capabilities and, like adding Azure Arc for security and tapping into a lot of the security tooling and monitoring and et cetera, the customers don't necessarily fully have on premise. So it's not just local government. There's a lot of different industry verticals that are now starting to move down that path of understanding what this technology is and how they could leverage it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I know you mentioned, auto manufacturing and others as well. So is so I'm trying to think, completed projects is really, I think, key, I think, to help people understand. Like, do you have one that's like, yeah, we're done, like they're there, that you could give some specifics around? I mean, you don't have to share name, but some specifics.
Sure, absolutely. So there's a few that were done recently that they migrated. One of them particularly, we used the Microsoft Preview, which is still Preview migration tool. It
Yep,
was
Azure
successful.
Migrate.
Azure Migrate, yes. The project was successful. Of course, for the supported operating systems on Linux and Windows, it went fairly smooth. There wasn't really any hiccups. Migration tool worked great. Now that they're there, they're still kind of evaluating, how they're going to use it. They're liking the integration with Azure because it's giving the end users this new experience of, hey, this is how we're deploying VMs through the portal today. It's the same concept, except we're picking the location of on-site where our Azure Stack HCI cluster is. So they're very familiar with the operations administration that allows them to just quickly pick up, where they are today with the operations of their environment and just move it right into Azure Stack HCI. So that's something that I'm seeing right now. Of course, the
Yeah.
Azure Arc is huge.
Yep. Yep. No, that's a big win there, that a lot of that Azure tooling comes right in. Tell me a little bit more, vertical size, like what can you share
Sure.
about this one in particular?
Most recently, we have the big automotive customer where it's anywhere from like a 2-node to a 6-node clusters, and then we have other customers that are basically on 2 or 4-node, mid-size, nothing crazy yet, around like, scaled out to like 16, but I'd say your mid-size market to enterprise. But each site is unique, right? There's no one size fits all for each site. Each site has its own requirements, depending on the customer and environment.
Yep.
So I'd say mid-size to enterprise market is really kind of where it's at right now.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you seeing as the primary workloads that people are moving? I mean, is it mostly VM still, or are you seeing a lot more adoption of like AKS and AVD?
Yeah, I'm seeing all the above. I have a customer right now that they have Citrix and they don't want to move to Azure AVD. And so they want to host local AVD on the Azure Stack HCI. I also am seeing customers that have Kubernetes clusters in Azure, but now want to start leveraging them on site because of compliance and what I was talking about before, some of their requirements. Mainly VMs. I'd say it's like 80% virtual machines, moving off technologies like Nutanix or Hyper-V or VMware onto Azure Stack HCI, and then starting to bring some of the other features locally. So that's what I'm seeing right now.
Cool. For organizations that are nervous to go from VMware to Azure Stack HCI, what would you say to them?
I like to dive into why they're nervous, and then try to give them demos or try to alleviate those concerns and questions to ease their adoption of the new technology. And this is actually a good topic that's happening a lot, is customers don't understand, or they have questions like, will the storage support the IOPS throughput, or does it do deduplication? Or there's just a lot of legacy thinking around the capabilities that Azure Stack HCI and its storage and hardware vendors are actually really good at. And I don't have any concerns. It's just they just need to understand and be educated a little bit more around how to go from like VMware to a new technology. So
Yeah. Yeah. And storage performance is actually one of the really, really good success stories on the Microsoft side, right? If you're coming from vSAN going to storage spaces direct on Azure Stack HCI, the performance kind of side by side is Microsoft's really winning that that part of the business. So that's an area where we can really showcase, hey, this is a great solution. So yeah, I mean, hands-on demos, like, hey, let's start playing with this stuff. There's a lot of great resources out there for that, right? So there's things like, HCI Jump Box or HCI Jumpstart. You deploy an all-in-one HCI virtual machine that lets you get in and play with the technology. There's also options with different hardware vendors to say, hey, can we like try and buy on some of this hardware and see if this is gonna work for us. Let's prove it along the way, with pretty low commitment. But the reality is it works. People are doing it. It's solid. So yeah, I mean, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'm also seeing unique situations. One in particular where Azure Stack Hub is being brought up. A little bit different technology, more of bringing development capabilities from Azure on site. A little bit, the requirements are a little bit bigger of a footprint, but that's something that's being discussed, around with customers as well. Just trying to understand the landscape of, hey, what is Azure Stack? What are all the different options and capabilities, and what best fits our scenario on migrating off these platforms onto Azure Stack HCI. So,
Yep, yep, that makes sense. Well, great. I mean, this is all helpful. I think people that are out there listening and watching are gonna take some value out of this and say, okay, like we can do this. There are sizable organizations doing this. There's people that have done it and it's working. So yeah, any final words, John?
uh, yeah, I think next year the industry's gonna start to really understand this whole Broadcom purchase. And right now, I'm getting a flood of inquiries about options to move off VMware, and Azure Stack HCI is really my best recommendation if they want to stay on site, have that integration with Azure, and start to leverage the latest and greatest tooling that Microsoft has to offer.
Yep, yep. I think for sure. And I'll say one more thing just about the VMware Broadcom piece of this is, it makes me really nervous because the innovation with Broadcom just really isn't there either. Like their history is not to buy a tool and then make it better, right? And so, VMware for so long was this like pillar of innovation and like, all the latest and greatest. And they've sold off Horizon, their VDI solution, to a different party, and now they're owned by this company that tends to just kind of let
Sure.
things slowly die. And so it just makes me nervous for the folks that are there. Like, I don't want them to miss out on some of the latest innovation, and that's really happening at Microsoft with Azure Stack HCI. So now's a good time to be exploring and looking at the next best thing. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Well, John, I really appreciate you joining us. It's been great hearing about some of the projects you've got going on and the direction you're seeing clients move. So really appreciate it. Hopefully we get to talk again soon.
Sure. Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yep. Yep. Thanks so much. Yep. Take care.